episode 6 is titled Recovery, Rebirth, and Resilience. And in this episode, there's a lot to unpack. You start off by taking listeners along on the Camina's international tour, where the band has this amazing BBC performance, but this also coincides with you relapsing into substance abuse. And then later you go on to talk about the Trump campaign and the events that led up to him being elected as president. And this kind of reign of terror on Muslims and other minority groups in the country becomes evident with a lot of the legislation that's being passed soon after. There's a mention of this New Year's Eve performance, which was the last concert you had with the band before you took a break. And then you speak on finally being able to accept that you needed help in seeking out a sponsor. Was there something about that concert that kind of changed something in you or made that realization clearer?
So it wasn't the concert specifically, but it was about just a few days after where I had been we did the show. I just, we weren't even really on talking terms as a band at that point. And it was very, because right even before that show, I had stopped showing up for things. I think I talked about it in the episode. But yeah, just a few days later, I almost got arrested for the first time ever, and it just kind of like, just having come from not even 6 months earlier, literally living my dream, doing the thing I had been wanting to do since I was a kid and being on tour with a band, that was my actual dream, and I was doing it, and it was just, it didn't feel good. And that's what kind of, motivated me to just have to change something. Yeah, it wasn't the concert itself. It was just it's what happened just a few days later, kind of going from that sort of a high to the lowest point ever, almost being arrested a mile or two from my house. What is it? How did this happen?
Right. In this episode, you also talk about this big push in the country for an anti-Muslim agenda. And this resulted in a lot of mass fear of Sharia law that kind of consumed a lot of the rhetoric at the time. Do you feel in some ways that Sharia law was almost like a buzzword that politicians would cling onto to build up this, I think it was mentioned, an Islamophobia machine?
Yeah, it still is. It's why even 10 years before the time that you're talking about, we wrote that song Sharia Law in the USA, because it was literally to just put that in, kind of mess with people and be oh, you're just scared of this stupid thing. Okay. And it's interesting that time. So for me, I think it's very interesting that I think that I was having this personal awakening, and it was really around the time of the marathon bombing that's when it was kind of, everything was, I feel like in a way I was, and I mentioned this I think at some point in the episode, or that I was just sort of actually ready to deal with stuff now, because I was finally starting to get well, so then it was a little bit not easier, but I was more just kind of aware of what was happening around me and how to, I had to be prepared for it.
Adding on to that, I think it was also mentioned that the Boston bombing kind of felt like a turning point where in history, and almost seemed to take us back to feelings of when 9/11 took place.
Yeah. And also just because it was here, in Boston, and my sisters were there, and my friend who I mentioned was there. So yeah, it felt, and it same feeling, being in that library, UMass Lowell, that I think I talked about, just the horrible kind of feeling of doom and dread that there's no, nobody can sort of talk you down from where you just know things are about to get pretty bad.
Right. But then you mentioned that you later end up deciding to go back to school and then getting your master's degree in social psychology. What inspired you to get that specific degree, and did that correlate with some of?
Yeah, so psychology, so from episode one, psychology was the only class that I really cared about in high school when I was a senior. Mr. Green, he's the one that inspired me to, because it was something I was good at. Like, even as horrible as I was doing mentally senior year, I did really decently well in psychology. So yeah, it was something in the back of my mind told me that, like, like I've got some issues, so maybe this is something that I can get into a little bit. And yeah, I just always found it interesting. And I had started working for the city of Medford, actually, in their sort of, they had like a underage drinking prevention sort of program. I had like and my supervisor there was the one that kind of pushed me to do this master's degree. And then from there, I started taking all sorts of different classes, like on police psychology, on different like community systems and stuff, and looking at things from like a public health sort of a angle. Initially I thought I wanted to be a therapist and stuff, but I realized that maybe the one-on-one stuff in that like wasn't for me. But yeah, so it was a really good experience, just being in school, being a student, and knowing that like I could do it.
In the 2016 elections, some Islamophobia seemed to just be ramping up between the Islam-related tweets that were made by Trump and the amount of hate crimes. What do you think this meant for America in your eyes, that Trump was really gaining steam and actually gaining a lot of supporters during the election?
I mean, I think that, yeah, it seemed like he kind of not came out of nowhere because everybody knew who he was, but just that it did seem to happen suddenly for people. I feel like I was able to see it a little bit earlier in terms of my circle of people, like my family, friends, whatever, because I went to that rally. And that's the first time that I was like, oh my God, like this is some real shit. This isn't just some stuff that like the media is like making up or whatever. And yeah, it was gross, and it, immediately started to bring out, the worst in people. I forget if like Mariam, she has a story that was not in the show where she was on the T in Boston, and this had never happened to her before, but someone, and she had my nephew in a stroller. He was pretty young at the time, and someone basically just said, like, you're a dirty immigrant, get the hell off this train. There was another story about a friend of was it a friend of Nuna's or somebody that she knew that was a young student who was wearing a hijab on the Green Line, who was cornered by a bunch of people. And so this kind of shit started happening. Even Asad, our CEO, his parents were, if I'm not getting this wrong, they were basically like threatened in the parking lot of a mall or like a movie theater or something like that. And I'm being aware of the fact that like I grew up as a fairly comfortable middle to upper middle class brown kid in a suburb. Like, for me, that time period was an indication that like, oh shit, like everything we were taught about racism and stuff was like pretty, not wrong, but like, yeah, I'll say it was wrong. It was very simplistic. It was very like, no, this shit is just still under the surface. Like, it's not like people pretended that like the 60s or whatever, this like peace, love generation thing, but like, no, man, people still basically, white people, a lot of white people don't like people of color. And just this very basic, and just seizing on this very like primal anti, whatever thing. So just the way that he was able to quickly gain steam. And it was also, I think, an indication of just that time sort of coincided with, I think, technologically, you just started to realize that like, oh man, people are just in different worlds. Like we don't even have the same basic understanding of the world. So that was super terrifying.
And you also talk with Batul Raza, who's the Assistant General Counsel at Boston Public Health Commission. And she said something about her experience in feeling constantly judged, feeling judged by others in her life as a Muslim American in that profession. But she also feels that allowed her to identify with communities that were underrepresented and disadvantaged. Mm-hmm. What about your conversation with Batul kind of stuck out to you?
I think when she was talking about being one of those people who was overseas when the Muslim ban or the travel ban, Muslim ban was announced, and just that inner kind of holy shit, like what's going to happen to me? For me, I was here. I was obviously like scared and upset and like pissed about it, but I was in the country, like I wasn't, but just to be like a Pakistani, who doesn't know if they can come home, and just like, yeah, like that kind of stuff, that really stuck out. And then also, just being kind of inspired by her, she comes home and she just wants to see what she can do to help, and so like, she just did what she knew how to do and like used her skills to just like right away to help people.
Yeah. So towards the end of the episode, Trump is elected into office as the 45th president of the United States. Do you remember feeling comforted by the fact that people were kind of coming out in droves to defend Muslim rights and to say that you're not alone? And but at the same time, there was obviously this threat with the anti-Muslim legislation and Trump's hateful rhetoric. So was it confusing to be overwhelmed with kind of like two different sides?
I was going to say it wasn't just one thing. It was very ambivalent, feelings of, we're going to, on the one hand, this is like everybody's nightmare, that night that I'll never forget the night that he got elected. It was a literal like nightmare. There was this thing in that same in the Boston Common where we had done that show, my last show with the band and stuff. Like there was like I hate to make this joke, but like a depression rally, after his election, basically, or just like a moment of solidarity or whatever. We did a couple of concerts and stuff too, but there was a bit of we have to be here for each other, because we're not going to survive, because there's literally, it seems like, damn, like, and Batul also said this, like, America, like the leader of the free world, like elected this guy. Right. So that was like, yeah, man, it was thrown over. Yeah, so a lot of conflicting feelings.
Right. What can we expect from the next episode, which is the wrap up of the entire series?
I thought this was going to be like an impossible task to wrap this show up, because there's just so many things to talk about. But I have to say, it was like it came together not easier than I thought, but more quickly, because like it's a real example, and it's a very like triumphant thing for me personally, even over the last 6, 7, almost, I guess since February that we've been doing this, I hadn't realized until we started putting the pieces of the show together, just how much we've like gone through, and how much like the ups and downs that I've even had personally putting all these things together. So I think it's like, I'm just really proud of it. I just was worried about like, how are we gonna like sum this up, and like, because we talked to so many people, we touched on so many things, but like we really, I think, captured where I'm at, now, in terms of how I feel about all these things. And yeah, just, you'll hear from, everybody in the family, you'll hear from the band again, and yeah, I think they're all good, but I'm really, really proud of this one.